and welcome. This is the Boundless Book Club with the Emirates Literature Foundation. You are here with
Ahlam,
Andrea,
and me, Annabelle. And today our special guest is Miles Buckeridge, a reporter from What's On. Miles, we are delighted to have you here today. Miles is a sci-fi enthusiast, a banner carrier for geekdom, and a man who believes in love being a crucial part of living your best life. Hear, hear. Which brings us to our topic for today. Stevie Wonder just called to say it. Meatloaf would do anything for it. The Beatles say they can't buy it. Julius Caesar and Cleopatra allegedly had it, and Scheherazade won it, and with it, her life. So I think you've guessed it by now. Today, we are talking about love. And I want to start by asking you all your opinion on this. Is Romeo and Juliet the most romantic love story of all time? Because you can't really have a conversation about love, I found anyway, without Romeo and Juliet coming up at least once or twice. Now, I have opinions on this, but I'm going to reserve them till other people have had thoughts and comments and questions.
I don't know. I think you love it or hate it, but it is the first, for me, I feel like it was the first experience of studying love in school. And when you're a teenager, reading about Romeo and Juliet, and they're quite young. I think she was 16 and he was 13 and 14. Yeah, so they're really young, and it's like the first love story that you come across.
I feel like when you are really young and you're reading that in school, for that to be the first vision of love that you get is quite damaging.
That's true. That is true. I mean, it's definitely passionate, isn't it? I think we can say that. Whatever it is, whether it's kind of lust or something else slightly grander, it's definitely passionate.
So there's one part in the story that I love. Obviously, the balcony scene. The scene where after the party he comes back to find her in the house, and he's confessing his love to her, and she says to him to swear. And then she says, "Oh, swear not by the moon, the inconstant moon that monthly changes in her circle orb, lest that thy love prove likewise variable." And he says, "What shall I swear by?" "Do not swear at all, or if thou wilt, swear by thy generous self, which is the God of my idolatry, and I'll believe thee." So I think whether you love the story or not, you can't deny the beauty of the language there.
Absolutely.
It always comes, I think, with anything Shakespeare, it doesn't really matter what you think about the plot and how all of the problems could be simply avoided by them communicating with one another just a little bit more. It always comes back to the language, doesn't it? I mean, he just says everything so well, and we still refer to star-crossed lovers beyond Romeo and Juliet. But I think the thing that I love the most, and I know it's very easy for me to be cynical and glib about Romeo and Juliet, and so in anticipation of this, I tried to do a little bit more research and think about it a little bit more. And it's just, when you were talking about that whole phrase about constancy, what's hilarious to me is that earlier on in that scene, like, he was engaged to someone else. He sees her at a party and is immediately in love with her. I mean,
yes.
As you do when you're teenagers, right?
Yeah. But on that note about teenagers that you were talking about, like, when you read it, I think is really important as well. But also the fact that it's about teenage love. And I think it's easy to be cynical about teenagers falling in love and to be very dismissive of it. And I don't know if you felt this way growing up, but it never felt less real or less intense or less important, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we're not going to talk about Normal People by Sally Rooney today, but it's something that I think a lot of people have referenced or talked about and really liked about that book, is that a big portion of it is two teenagers forming a very intense, deep, meaningful attachment at a very young age, and not minimizing that or making it or trivializing it. So it doesn't really matter how sensible Romeo and Juliet is, or kind of what you think of the characters, but the fact that there's this great tragedy with these teenagers at the heart of it. I mean, I'm always gonna,
and it's raw, right? At that point, like they don't have any idea what it's supposed to look like, or there's no other factors but the feelings of that moment, and then they just fall super intensely into it.
And disapproving parents as well, which proves to be a universal sort of constant throughout history. Families that don't get on or approve of their offspring's choice in partner.
Quite. Where would we be without mother-in-law jokes?
So Miles, how does it feel like being on a love episode with 3 women?
It's a very good question. It's an honor, obviously, and a privilege. But yeah, I would always describe myself as a lover more than a fighter, anyway. So yeah, I feel maybe not that I've earned my place here, but I feel at home. So thank you, thank you very much for the lovely intro and for inviting me on as well. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
You know, I was just going to say, like, we started with a question about Romeo and Juliet because it comes up so often. So we've got Romeo and Juliet out of the way now, and we're moving on. Done. So what have you chosen today? Like, is it a great big epic love story, or what's your love choice?
Kind of. It's for me. It's big and epic, and love is most certainly not necessarily the passionate love between a man and a woman, or two lovers. More a case of love as a general theme that transcends mortality even. It's the book that I've chosen is Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell, who's one of my favorite authors anyway, because he tends to write quite kind of bizarre, abstract stories and that's massively what I'm into. So, but yeah, and Cloud Atlas, in terms of its structure, it's quite fascinating that we're talking about this now, because there's a film out at the moment which, although doesn't touch on any of the same subject matter, follows a very similar structure. Tenet, that's out in the cinemas at the moment, it's got an eerily, is that a spoiler? Hopefully not. But let's move on. Anyway. So yeah, the Cloud Atlas was, I think that's possibly the first book of David Mitchell's that I read, and it was recommended by a friend. And yeah, it's a series of 6 different stories, leading sort of from one chronological period to another. And moving on in a weird kind of pyramid shape, and then it kind of goes back down again. So it's separated into different stories. Some are comic, some are kind of film noir style, and culminating in kind of a futuristic sci-fi adventure. But they all have common characters, or at least characters that are reincarnations of one another. And it's about these relationships and these between individuals and between institutions that kind of transcend, particular lives. And I find that kind of beautiful, this idea that maybe there is something about our soul or whatever it is, the immaterial, ethereal being that is able to kind of leap into these next avatars or whatever. And I don't know whether you want to call it reincarnation or what, but it's a beautiful idea to me, like the idea of a soulmate, I guess. It's always a fascinating one.
I think it's a great choice. He's such an interesting writer. And when I read his first novel, which is called Number 9 Dream, I think, I thought he was quite similar to Murakami in that sort of abstract way, which is also absolutely wonderful.
Did we have him at the festival?
I think
he
so.
has been, right? Yeah.
Yes, yeah. He was here a few years ago to talk about the Bone Clocks, that was my first David Mitchell. So if Cloud Atlas is anything similar to that in terms of like swapping between characters and playing with structure and just being completely mad, then I'm all for it.
It is very much. It is very much like that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very much like sort of disregard for the linear kind of process of things, which I kind of enjoy a little bit.
So when you think about the story, do you think of it as a love story?
Not initially, but certainly it's when one of the things that I took away whilst I was reading it was very much this idea of soulmates, and it's something that I still think about to this day, and not necessarily in regards to the book, but yeah, it's such a fascinating idea to me, the idea of having this predestined partner for you, and whether or not, you know, that's reality or it's part of love's folly. I don't know. I can't answer it with any definitive conclusion. But yeah, that's for me, that was one of the big points that I got out of the book. Was very much this idea that that there is someone out there that can draw the best out of you, or that's almost, you're drawn together. There's some kind of invisible force, invisible energy that's compelling you. You are inextricably part of that other person's story. So yeah, that very much was evident in the story.
That's a really beautiful idea, I think. But it's also very much like Romeo and Juliet. It's got that intensity of feeling that. Can I just jump in? Can I jump in with my book here? Sorry.
Yes.
That it's got that intensity of feeling that John Armstrong argues might be not what we should be aiming for. This book is called The Conditions of Love, The Philosophy of Intimacy. And it's a really sort of elegant, slender little book, which is absolutely lovely. It's really erudite and intellectual, and when you read it, you feel like you are, even if you're not like me. It's completely accessible, and it looks at love through the lens of literature, starting with Goethe in 1770 something or other, talking about like the first romance novel, which is really interesting. I don't know if it was the first romance novel, but according to John, it was. And it's about this man who has all those super intense feelings of love, which is, you know, the rapture and the obsession and the longing, and then the doubt, and it's all about, there's nothing really about the object of his affection. It's all about his feelings, which are so intense. And that was the talk of the town in Europe in the 1700s, apparently. And that came to equal our modern understanding of love, which I find really fascinating. And then he keeps going from Goethe to Plato to Socrates and Tolstoy, and he uses all these different stories to kind of discuss what love is and what we should expect from it. And it's really fascinating. It says things like, sorry, I was saying, when I read it the first time, I underlined so many things that I want to come back to. Love is closely connected with our vision of happiness, yet there is no one we're more likely to hurt or be hurt by than the person that we say we love. So why is it so hard to find love and so difficult to keep? And then he talks about how love, the popular opinion is that love is a feeling, but we need to perhaps see it more as a verb. It's something that you do actively every day, and if you stop doing it, it's gone. And it's really lovely, and it comes to it's just really wonderful to read, and it's very quick, so I recommend it to everybody. But I just want to read this little bit towards the end where it says, imagine Hamlet as a father. Imagine Kathy discussing mortgage payment with Heathcliff. This is the internal tragedy of love. If it's successful, it changes. When love is successful, it leads to a new set of actions like children and buying property and doing the dishes. Coping even moderately well with these require a completely different set of qualities to the ones that we fell in love with. And I don't know. I don't recognize any of that.
That's it. You know, when you think about love, I mean, it's fascinating that your angle was more like a philosophical view on love, and it's like, is love a real thing, or is it something that human beings, you know, it's a feeling, but they coupled up with a lot of structure and action and, you know, tangible things that are related to love. And so where does the, you know, where is it, does the human need part stop, and then where does love start? And I wonder about that. I wonder if love is a man-made concept.
I don't think that you can deny that these feelings are real, and also that the sort of mature love that he's also referring to is real, but they might be different things. Maybe we need more words for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I thought it was interesting that you were bringing up the concept of soulmates there, and like you were talking about love being an active thing, like that there's a conscious choice in the word.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was really interesting, because that's something that I'll read Cloud Atlas and I'll see how I feel about it, but I've always been very firm in the opinion of soulmates, and it's a phrase that's actually not annoyed me, but it has jarred with my perception of love. Mm-hmm. Because I think that the beauty of it, and maybe this is just a different love in a different stage, but it's consciously choosing it. It's kind of saying that you have the agency to choose something else. But nothing that you choose this. And so that's why I think the word has always felt quite trite to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think it comes with a lot of baggage, doesn't it? Soulmates. Yeah. It's knocked around a lot, and possibly not always in the most authentic way. But yeah, I think what I found interesting about your little intro to it there, and which I totally agree with. You were talking about phases of love, and I think that's another important thing to recognize, or an element or aspect of what we group under the term love, is that it is as well as being a verb, it's also a kind of a process, isn't it? It ages, not necessarily in a negative way, but it changes, it evolves. The kind of the Romeo and Juliet love might be phase one, which sadly, obviously, they didn't get to go into.
You should try not to kill yourself in phase one. That would be a good first step.
1 to 10 super quickly.
All he had to do was wait 5 minutes.
Oh, the youth, they're so impatient.
Yeah, absolutely. Impetuous youth.
Terrible.
Oh, wow. So when I think about love stories, for some reason, I'm really attracted to the tragedy element. And the story that I've chosen today is Broken Wings by Kahlil Gibran, which is one of the most stories in Arab literature as well. So Gibran is himself in the story, and he's very young. He's a 17-year-old, and he goes back to Lebanon from the States, and he goes to Beirut, and he goes to visit one of his father's old friends, Faris Karama, who is very well respected in Beirut. He's a very wealthy man, very kind, generous, and he welcomes him into his home. And when he walks in, he sees his daughter, Selma Karama, and immediately falls in love with Selma. And Selma has this very angelic aura about her. She's also dressed in white, and just a very calm and soothing aura, and soft-spoken, and just taking care of her father, very generous to the guest, and he just falls in love with her madly. And so they all sit together, and they're in the middle of the conversation, and then the bishop sends someone to come collect Faris Karama and bring him to him. So Gibran and Selma are left alone in the house. Faris Karama goes to the bishop, and as they're falling deeply, madly in love at first sight, the bishop is proposing to Selma for his son from Faris Karama in the same moment. So it doesn't last very long. And so it's very painful, and eventually they come to know about it. But in that time, and in the story, women don't really have a strong say or a will of themselves. So Selma is very much having to go with whatever her father thinks is best for her. She doesn't fight it, and she thinks it's her duty to oblige and go with the situation. So the scene that I love in the book is one day Selma meets Gibran in the church and tells him, look, this is going to happen tomorrow. I'm going to be somebody else's wife. And so we can't be, but I want you to be happy. I want you to find joy. And so he says to her, I'll be whatever you want me to be. What do you want me to be? And she goes on to say to him, I want you to love me as a poet loves his sorrowful thoughts. I want you to remember me as a traveler remembers a calm pool in which his image was reflected as he drank its water. I want you to remember me as a mother remembers her child that died before it saw the light. And I want you to remember me as a merciful king remembers a prisoner who died before his pardon reached him. So she goes on and this says to him what she wants of him. And then in the end, she says, and the end of this scene, not the whole story, she says, tomorrow the truth will become ghostly and the awakening will be like a dream. Will a lover be satisfied embracing a ghost, or will a thirsty man quench his thirst from the spring of a dream? And that moment is really powerful for me because this is a love that cannot be, but in that moment they're making it immortal, and it's this perfect love that they've just defined and they're going to carry with them for the rest of their lives. And it's interesting because a love like that, I feel it just grows and grows in your imagination and in your heart, and you feel like it just becomes this perfect thing in your image because you never got to it. But who knows, Selma and Gibran could have gotten married and then been fighting over laundry or have other problems and not work out. But it's that kind of immortality of the feeling that you take with you when a love is not fulfilled, like Romeo and Juliet.
The most perfect love is the one that never happens, right? Mm-hmm. That's the only perfect kind.
I think so. Certainly in literature and in the way that you romanticize love in your mind.
Yeah. I'm just thinking that if there are any romance novelists who read that, they're just going to resign immediately. You just read that and you go, well, I'll be going.
Oh my God, Gibran. Like my dream is my fantasy is that Gibran would have still been alive and I would have heard his audiobook in his own voice of Broken Dream. I want to hear him read this.
In terms of real life, the only time when you communicate with somebody in a relationship on that level, talking about the love that's between you or describing it or trying to sort of, to make them feel the intensity of your love is normally either if you've done something wrong or on a special occasion like a birthday or an anniversary. But maybe it's something that we should force ourselves to do more, to sort of share and in that experience and release that oxytocin and be in the moment and enjoy the thing.
That's a really good point.
Mm-hmm.
But it wouldn't be that poetic if you've been married for 10 years.
True.
It'd be like, I think it's a great thing that you cleaned up this area that you had made.
Yeah.
And I will let you live another day, my love.
Yeah.
See, love has become so practical, so unromantic.
Yes. Can I just say, I had a look on Goodreads to see what people said about this book, and someone had given it 1 star because they still believed in true love. And I thought, that's not how you rate books. They're like, no.
What's fascinating to me is I think that probably one of the last great bastions of this kind of unachievable love, should we say, can I go that far? Can I say that? Would be Disney, right? That's the kind, if you want to sort of mock someone for their particular point of view, if it's too, rosy in your view of love is Disney princess or prince-esque. But now with the Pixar movies, which are obviously part of Disney, their stories about love are much more grown up and adult and complicated and
yeah,
and I think that's I think it's brilliant. I think it's so important for kids to understand that yes, there is this type of all-consuming love, but there's also this equally beautiful, complicated, messy, mucky love that makes you work for it. That, as you say, is a verb. It's something that you have to concentrate on, and sometimes you chase it and it moves further away. But sometimes, so I think that's an interesting direction.
Yeah, it's great that the understanding of love has evolved in literature and film and cartoons that kids are exposed to. So our final book for the episode, Annabelle.
Okay, well, 16-year-old me would be very confused about the fact that I am on a podcast about love and literature, and I'm not choosing the Jane Austen. What?
That's confusing.
Are you having a stroke, Annabelle? But no, I nearly chose Persuasion by Jane Austen. But the thing is, everyone knows she does it well, and I thought today I would talk about some non-fiction that has an epic love story that you might not realize from just reading the blurb on the back and looking at the title. But this really surprised me. So I won't go into too much detail because the joy of this book is just being completely overwhelmed by everything that David Nott goes through. He's basically, when he's not a doctor in the UK, basically takes unpaid leave to go to war zones and work on the front line in war zones. Basically putting his life at risk for what he does. So you meet him going to kind of Sarajevo in 1993 and then working in Aleppo as well, war zones there. Is that he uses quite straightforward language and he doesn't really spare you any of the details. So if he's talking about a surgery and he's talking about horrific things going wrong, snipers in Syria specifically targeting pregnant women, things like that, it's horrific reading. And it talks about all of the things that he's seen and done, all the people that he's helped, the brutality that he's seen, but also in contrast, the immense kindness that's gone with that. And so when you have the backdrop of all of the horrors of war and the trauma, to then kind of be confronted with, because it's his memoir of him experiencing kindness from other people, and then quite far into his life when he's in his 50s, and quite far into the book, meeting his wife, at the point where, because of what he does, he's given up on love, he's given up on the idea that he might ever have a family. So when you've gone through that journey with him, and then he meets his current wife Ellie at a fundraiser for Syria, and then he's in Gaza, he's operating, and he's described this as basically being being in an apocalypse, or what he imagines that would be like. And her business card drops out onto the floor, and he's in Gaza in this chaos, and he thinks, this is just random enough that I'm just going to email Ellie and tell her that I think that she is a nice person, because I might die here, so what have I got to lose? And so he emails her, and after all of this is done and he goes back to the UK and Gaza, he's asked her out for dinner, she's agreed, and he's gone back and he's sort of kind of regretting it. And I'm just going to read you that little bit where he finally gets to the date, their first date, and he's in the restaurant somewhere in Chelsea. And he says, I found it even more difficult to appreciate that I was now sitting opposite someone I'd only emailed because I'd thought that I was going to die. It seemed an inauspicious way to begin whatever this was or might become. I had had many disastrous relationships in the past, some lasting longer than others, but they had all fallen by the wayside. I had always longed for a partner, maybe even a family, but simply had not met the right person. I assumed too that there was no one who could possibly want me. I still harbored a sliver of hope though. Maybe this would be the final roll of the dice. So from that point on, it's not straightforward either. He finds it very difficult to readjust, obviously, to normal life and routine. And a really beautiful part of this book is not just how incredible he is as a human being, but how amazing his wife is at bringing him back from all of that and being there for him. And so this was kind of the most unlikely best love story in literature for me, because it felt so compassionate and so real. And when you finish the book as well, you're actually met with an afterword by Eleanor, his wife herself. And she says something really beautiful about kind of the concept of romantic love and heroism. Because she says, second only to stories of romantic love, you've got the tale of the hero undertaking a mission. And then she goes on to say that society demands heroes, but we don't necessarily want them to be too human. She continues to say, love, like surgery, isn't always tidy, and it isn't always easy. In many ways, rushing in and out of war zones is easier than the day in, day out normality of home life. You won't always be the hero and savior. There will be routine, boredom, and difficult conversations. I often have to remind myself what an adjustment married life and fatherhood must be for David, someone who has lived so much of his life on the razor's edge and in a fair degree of emotional isolation. There's a Desert Island Discs interview that he's done as well that he mentions in the book. And if you're familiar with Desert Island Discs, one of the things that you have to do is obviously choose music that is important to you. And there is a bit where he introduces a track called Fix You by Coldplay. And he starts to introduce it and he starts choking up and the presenter is as well, because he can't really talk about it without getting very emotional. And they play the song, and basically he's chosen it because he spent so long thinking, going around the world, fixing other people, fixing all of these horrible things. And then, Eleanor was the one who fixed him.
Wow.
Beautiful.
Yeah. I highly recommend it. Read with tissues.
That's a great choice. Four very different approaches to love, which was really interesting this episode.
Yeah.
That's the point of love, isn't it? It's all different for everyone.
Do you think there's an element of love that thrives in juxtaposition? So say, for example, as you said, those two very different environments, war zone versus mundane routine. People always say that opposites attract, that there's almost two jagged sides of a jigsaw puzzle, and that's part of that exploration of difference, of the exotic, of if there's something elemental about love that is almost searching for the opposite. I don't know.
I don't know if there's a rule for that.
No.
I don't know.
I think a balance is important, especially when it comes to energy and approach. So, maybe if someone is overly emotional and someone is like more rational, they kind of balance each other out in that they meet somewhere in the middle. Or if someone doesn't plan at all and someone is a planner, they kind of find a way to meet in the middle. It's good. Whereas if both are sort of out of balance on certain things, comes down to that execution of love, right?
It's execution.
Different kinds of love as well, I guess. The kind of the love from friction is different to the love from simpatico or whatever. The overlapping of two different worlds.
Because this is a book club, what kind of love do you think makes the best story?
Unrequited.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. I think unrequited love is a brilliant one. I can't steal that. I've got to come up with my own one. But I fully endorse that answer.
Did you guys read A Little Life by Honey? No, it was very, very traumatic, but that was one of those great love stories that you just don't forget. That became a movement. There were people in New York with T-shirts with Jude and I don't remember the other guy's name right now. But
who
people
is it
buying
by?
T-shirts.
Who is the author?
Hani Yanagihara, I think her name is.
Okay.
I think it's like her only novel, possibly, and it was
like this thick.
Yeah, And it like reading it takes a lot out of you. I think it took a lot out of her. I think in an interview after, she said she wasn't sure she would write another. But yeah, that love is in that book. There are lots of different people with different sort of approaches to love to this main character, but it takes years. It's years of trauma before it comes to fruition, and then it's very short-lived, and it'll stay with you forever if you read it. And that's another one that's not great for a book club because it's very traumatizing.
Yeah, I think you know the sort of the part of longing is a really key element of a good love story, whether that's someone you aspire to attaining, or someone you've lost, or someone. So I think that longing is a big part.
Well, actually, looking at television series as well tells us that is a compelling story that like we find universally compelling, because every single television sitcom has that will they won't they storyline. You have it in Friends, you have it in it, Cheers or whatever. It's always there because it keeps us like, it reels us in. So just
what happens in the end.
So from the point of view of constructing a narrative and keeping people reading, I mean, it makes practical sense, I think, for that to be make a good story. Because we just want to know.
It's true. What do you think is the most epic romance in literature? We would love to know what you think. Let us know by emailing comms@emiratesLitFest.com, or you can send us a message on social media. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. If you're watching rather than listening, you'll know we're on YouTube. Don't forget to hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And the next time we are going to be looking at the Booker Prize shortlist. So do tune in. From all of us here at the Boundless Book Club, goodbye. Be safe, read the books, and stay classy, San Diego. Can I say that?
60% of the time it works every time.